Hello, this is Michael Cross with another edition of Unlock the Door, in which we will talk about issues in society from a psychological basis. And tonight, I would like to deal with the issue of denial. And I'll mix that with a little bit of Freudianism and so forth. Because I think really people need to understand the concepts of psychoanalysis and psychology in order to understand what's going on in today's society. Now, I did have a guest lined up that was going to talk about the issue of polygamy and whether it was going to become an issue that would become the next, like the gay marriage thing, and start getting accepted in society. I'm not sure what happened, but for some reason I did not get contacted, so we'll see if that gets rescheduled here very shortly, so because she has some really interesting insights into this issue. But tonight what I want to do is instead, and yeah, this is one of those plan B situations, but I had actually thought about this this week when I've been listening to the news, and that is, well, why is it that the situation that we're seeing here with various things going on, you got the IRS scandal, you've got the Benghazi scandal, you've got the Syrian crisis, which even though that's still called a crisis, I would actually say that's a scandal. Then, of course, Iran coming up. You've got wiretapping. You've got all kinds of political cronyism that basically, I don't know, it sounds more like a history lesson in old-style boss politics, like Tammany Hall and stuff like that, than it does modern American government. Or maybe they just didn't, we just haven't had the internet and so forth for all these years, and this kind of stuff was taking place. Well, but then again, I guess the way I look at it, and I'm sure there's listeners here that can relate to this, when growing up and hearing all the stuff about Nixon and everything, and then you kind of expected, okay, well, this will stop scandals in the future. Instead, it seems to, in some ways, inoculate us to those things. Now, think about this. In the mid-1980s, the whole issue of sexual harassment was really picking up, to the point that if you said something about a woman's dress being nice, you could get a sexual harassment lawsuit being thrown against you. Then we had the whole Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky thing. And for some reason, well, I think I know the reason to this, but for some reason that kind of knocked the whole sexual harassment thing down. It didn't mean as much anymore. And I think it's because instead of what some people thought would be the results, the idea that it would shed light on the idea of what could be considered sexual harassment, it instead normalized it. And what I mean by that is, once you had people starting to make excuses for Clinton's behavior, then that tended to cause people to think, well, that's not so bad then. And I didn't see any study. Well, I did see one study that said that, oral sex rates had gone up amongst younger people, teenagers, and so forth, right after this period. I didn't see any studies done on whether reported adultery went up, but I would suspect that it did. Now, the thing is that in society we tend to incorporate what the prevailing norms are. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we dealt with the issue of large families and how society incorporates the idea that's been mostly pushed by government and foundations and things like Agenda 21 and so forth, that people should have small families. Well, you don't really need the propaganda after a while. because what happens is people start institutionalizing these values. They start thinking, okay, well, we're pregnant with the second kid, I guess that's it. And they don't think really in those terms. Well, they may think a little bit, but not in a serious way. When they think, well, maybe 3, 4 kids would be kind of nice to have. A lot of people will just accept what the societal norm is. Okay, got 2 kids, and then they will justify it. Okay, that's when they start saying, well, we have a car that doesn't fit more than maybe 2 kids. Well, we would have to buy a new house, or we would have to remodel a room to make it 2 rooms, or we would have to do this. But essentially, the decision gets made, and then the rationalization sets in. And that's a Freudian term. Now, I know it's part of our general way of speaking. It's in the dictionary, but rationalization is when we make excuses and we justify what we do. And we do rationalization all the time. When we might, a person throws a cigarette on the ground, and someone might say, well, that's littering. Well, no, it's not that much, and it'll blow away, and there's nothing to worry about. Look at the guy over there. He threw a cup from a restaurant down on the ground. And so rationalization just basically means that you're going to find a way to explain it. And, well, I think that's what's happening now. And it's happening big time in regards to what's going on. And essentially, I'm sure that Richard Nixon is, wherever he's at, he's looking down and just laughing at this whole situation. And I think it's just because of the fact that we really haven't learned anything. I mean, and look how quickly society changes too. I mean, you think there's a certain permanence, but I remember just, my gosh, 20 years ago, and that's not much, really. 20 years ago, the idea of going into a country and doing some sort of war. I mean, George Bush Sr., I guess that's about 22 years ago. But George Bush Sr. had to really, 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 really convince people to go into Iraq and throw Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. Even though later I think you could probably see that a lot of this had to do with the price of oil and other factors, and maybe even some misunderstandings. But the thing is, still, Bush won. He was able to get people to agree to go in and do this war on Saddam. The first one, not the second. And that, again, took a lot of effort because Americans were by and large anti-war. I mean, Americans have always been anti-war. My gosh, during World War II, most people don't realize this. During World War II, according to the, I think it was the Marshall Studies, the 85% of soldiers fired above the heads of the of German or Japanese troops. They did not want to shoot a human being. When this was found out to be the case, then that's when they instituted boot camp to use behavioral modification to get soldiers to start reacting on a stimulus response. They didn't see those targets as they would be seen in their brain. The soldiers in their fire would not be seen as human beings. They'd be seen as targets. And, stimulus, response. Stimulus appears, response, fire. And that's what boot camp's all about. It has nothing to do with getting people in shape or anything like that. Most of the young people that go in, they don't really get in shape during boot camp if they're not in shape already. That is designed to get people to be able to shoot and not hesitate. And during Vietnam, the amount of bullets fired far exceeded those that were fired in Germany or Japan. And, and that's gone on and on and on. Our culture has changed a great deal. So our expectations have changed. And after 9/11, all of a sudden, when you got that first little taste of blood going in after Afghanistan, Then it was, okay, well, let's go after Iraq. Well, it didn't take quite as much persuasion then. And now we just kind of see it as normal. You know, you say, well, yeah, there's drone attacks in Yemen. Yeah, and, you know, who's on Dancing with the Stars or something like that. You have the government funding all kinds of, well, I would say very nasty individuals around the world. And for the most part, most people don't even know. And if you do tell them, they look at you funny, like you've just said something really bizarre, out of this world, and, you know, where are you from, or something like that. And that whole thing is starting to lead us into a militarization, where the norm, look at the Olympics, you know, for those of you that watch the Olympics. The last Olympics, every single country, even North Korea, had normal clothes on. All right? They marched in during these opening ceremonies, and they had just regular. Some of them wore traditional costumes. Some of them just wore nice suits. Some of them, you know, whatever. They wore regular types of clothes. The Americans were the only ones that were militaristic. They wore outfits that looked like they were from some sort of military academy. I mean, this is what's changing. Look around you. America is changing, and it's changing rapidly. And I'm going to try to explain that here in just a moment. Now, I want to get back to that whole thing about rationalization, but first, I want to compare that to another term, and that's called denial. I have a lot of people on my Facebook that they are trying to find some way to try to explain this whole situation. Well, Bush did this, you know, whenever you point out something that Obama's doing, or this senator did that, and so forth. And again, that's a type of rationalization. But then sometimes, I mean, when you get stuff like, I've noticed, if you really, now I'm not saying that you should do this, I'm just going to say that maybe people, you know, you might want to see where your tax money's going if you're living in the United States. Type in the topic into Google, rebel eats Syrian soldier's heart. Or either rebels or Al-Qaeda execute Syrian soldiers. Oh, there's others too. You could type in Syrian rebel beheading, or there's a lot of these videos, or whatever, or postal workers thrown to their death by Syrian rebels. And these will be either on YouTube or LiveLeak or something like that. And, you know, when you point this out to people who are, you know, who you would think would be very anti-war, very progressive type individuals, they'll come up with they'll either go into the rationalization or outright denial. Oh, you don't know if those are really real situations. Those could be played by actors or something like that. Well, you know, the other day I didn't know about the one about the heart thing, you know, and I was told about that actually by a guy I know who's from Morocco. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty apparent. It's not acting, and you know, the Arabic in there and everything is as it is translated at the bottom. And if you point, where are the anti-war people now? All right, I mean, what happened to them? Did they all get abducted by aliens? Did they all, like, you know, is there something going on? Did they all get arrested? Are they all at Gitmo or something? I don't know, because you don't see them now. And the ones that you do see, people that you would think would be very anti-war and, you know, let's have, you know, everyone come together and be kind to one another. You point this stuff out about Syria or Libya, and they'll just kind of, they'll like, well, no, our government's not sending arms. No, our government's not doing this. Well, and they'll go into this denial that totally ignores reality. totally ignores reality. And why is that? It gets frustrating. I'm sure many of you out there have been like, what? What's going on here? And I don't care if you're a political liberal, political conservative, political libertarian, whatever. It still must be frustrating. Okay, when you see this, and these people are not stupid. Okay, I mean, you could, if it was like Idiocracy, where, you know, by the way, if you haven't seen that movie, I think it was a comedy that now is more of a documentary than anything else. But these people are not Idiocracy. Okay, these people have normal or even above normal IQ, and yet they're able to do mental gymnastics to justify what's going on today. And yes, there are conservatives that do the same thing and so forth. And, you know, I don't think it's a rare thing. Well, maybe it is rare that you've got people that will actually say, okay, you know, there's dirty stuff going on here and dirty stuff there. Oh, by the way, that reminds me, you know, I pointed this out to someone the other day. I something about the whole Syrian thing. And the first thing this person says, well, yeah, but John McCain supports him too. Well, so? I mean, that is not a justification. Just because, you know, just because Obama supports this and McCain supports this, that does not mean, well, the world should support it. I mean, that's, or that we should just say, okay, well, if McCain was in there right now, he'd be doing the same thing. Well, that's not valid. Okay, but let's go into some of this stuff here. Now, first, I just want to give a little bit of a background here. First of all, if we do like a psychoanalysis of this sort of thing, we must take a look at the idea that we tend, when we are young, and I'd like to save some of this, you know, for a further show when I deal with how manipulation takes place, you know, using the subconscious, you know, the whole mind control and stuff. But I could easily fill 2 or 3 hours with that. But when we're young, we are first connected to our mothers from about 0, you know, birth to about 1.5. We actually connect in such a way that we believe we're part of them. All right? We are a projection of our mothers, essentially. And that's true for both boys and girls. There is this projection thing that takes place. So your ego is really an ego, I mean, basically, okay, in the Freudian concept, you have the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is sort of your instincts. The things like, oh, I'm hungry, oh, I'm thirsty, oh, he or she looks like a really hot person. That's the id. You got the superego, which is kind of the, you shouldn't do this, you know, this is bad. You got to follow the rules. And the ego is kind of the one that makes the decision. I mean, I've got kids, so I guess I use this analogy. If you think of the Winnie the Pooh series, the id would be Tigger, the superego would be the rabbit, and Winnie the Pooh would be more of the ego. Just kind of goes one direction or the other depending on what someone says to him. And the thing is that when we're young, we don't have that really developed yet. But around 2 years of age, we start separating from our mothers. And from about 2 to 3, that's when we have to start learning how to conform to, and we know it, we have to start learning to conform to certain societal things. And a lot of people make fun of this without really understanding it very much, but Freud called it the anal stage of development. And really what that refers to is the stage in which the first big trauma for the kid is being told, okay, you have to go use the bathroom there. Okay, when it comes to a dog or something like that, you know, it's kind of the same thing. You got a puppy, it messes on the floor, you smack it with a newspaper, eventually some people rub their nose in it, whatever. Eventually the dog learns to go and grab the leash and go to the door and, you know, whimper until you take him for a walk. Well, that's not what we do with kids. And so the thing is, we try to train them to conform. That's about the same age in America that people start insisting that their kids wear a bathing suit if they go to if they go even down to the park at the river to swim or something like that. But you start learning rules. And then around 4 and 5 and 6, that's when that's the Oedipal stage of development. And that is where, it's one of the terms for it. It's also phallic stage. But anyway, the thing that happens there is we start developing such things as our attraction, usually to the opposite sex. We start developing a certain sense of what's normal, what our expectations should be, how we should behave, and so forth. And that just that continues to grow. And we also, at the end of that stage, we start separating, just like we did with the ego when we were separating from our moms. That's when we start separating from our family, really. That's when kids start questioning. For the most part, some kids question when they're 4 years old, but most of them, they start really questioning around the 5 and 6 stage, where they can actually say, why do we do this? And, my friend doesn't do this, and so forth. And this is also where we start learning, not only start learning a little bit of our individuality, but we don't just break away. We project. And what I mean by project is we start to develop this thing in which we not only project what our idea of the perfect man and perfect woman are. And again, that goes back to the Oedipal stage, and that's when we start thinking, okay, guys, that's why you will marry people that remind you of your mother. Girls marry their fathers. And that's been shown many, many, many times in numerous studies that seems to be the case. But we also start projecting what our ideas are about society and our ideas about what God is, even. And I saw a study recently about this. It said that our ideas of God are based on our fathers. Yeah, I mean, it's based on our fathers. And to a certain degree, the father, and then kind of the family, rule structure and so forth. So, in a sense, if you are raised in a very permissive home, you start projecting that God is kind of this cosmic hippie out there who's all forgiving and everything's wonderful, and life is to be explored. Life is to learn and to experience. On the other hand, you get the people that might come from the very demanding family. This is very strict. Here's the rules: A, B, C, D, so forth. And in those cases, you start developing the idea that God is, Saddam Hussein in the sky, and that you will be punished for what you do wrong. If you think wrong, do wrong, you will be punished one way or another. And in a sense, that also relates to the way we see our government and our leaders. But it develops in a somewhat different way. But there's still this projection of an ideal on what government should be. If you are raised where your parents are very cynical towards government and always questioning, you'll question. If you're raised in an environment where your parents will say, you follow the rules. If you get in trouble at school, that shows you're the bad kid, and you will be punished when you get home. That's, you're going to basically be raising some TSA agents or, these kind of cops you see on YouTube videos. But that is what's going to happen. And if you raise them in kind of an idea that it's okay, you follow rules, but you can question those rules, and you can analyze why they're there and maybe whether they should be changed or not. Well, then you're going to raise kids who, I don't care whether they're going to be conservatives or liberals or libertarians or whatever. They're at least going to have a healthy way of looking at government and understand the basis of law. Now, this gets me to my major point, and that is that this can be very problematic in both the individual, in reference to how they see themselves in this context, and it can also be very problematic in which how we see our elected leaders. Now, let me give you a case in point. Let's take a look at Barack Obama without giving a whole long history, which would be interesting in and of itself, but I want to get to these other things. If we take a look at Barack Obama, his father abandoned him at a very young age. His mother seemed to be somewhat, into causes and stuff, and kind of, I don't get this idea of a Mary Poppins sort of environment. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but still, he's abandoned early by his father. He's biracial in the 60s, which was not really a good time to have that as a trait. So you're going to feel a little bit more outsider. Later, his mother remarries. They move to Indonesia and with his stepdad, and they live there for a while. And then when I think he's just before adolescence, his mother brings him back to Hawaii and gives him over to her parents to raise. Now, that is going to be extremely problematic for a child, especially an intelligent one. And Obama's not dumb. I mean, he is a very intelligent person. But that's going to be very problematic. And it can affect different people in different ways. And I tend to think that it affects him in the same way that it affected another person who was president recently who came from a very troubled childhood. And that was Bill Clinton. And there seems to be some parallels there with them. And that is that they seem to thrive in the public eye. They love the approval of people. They love it when people are paying attention to them. They love it when they're able to move the masses. And in a sense, it's almost like they live through their persona. I guess when you're president, you feel like you have a right to do that. I mean, you're the most powerful person on earth. But still, this is a trait that you find throughout their lives, even before they became president. And I think, to a certain degree, you create an uncertainty in a child who comes from this kind of environment in which they overcompensate, and then they find meaning in their ability to be able to persuade, in their ability to be able to achieve things. So when they climb the political ladder, they are affirming their own value and affirming that those inferiority complexes that they developed when they were young are indeed false. And so this is their way of compensating to a degree. They feel like that they're able to make up for the feelings of doubt they probably had when they were children. Now, the problem with that is it also creates, once you do get to that point, it creates a situation in which you become extremely vulnerable to criticism. You do not like criticism. You feel that those who oppose you are, in some way, it's an us versus them, a me versus you. If you question me, you're questioning not what I'm doing, but you're questioning me, myself. And so this is something that I noticed to a small degree in Clinton. He didn't seem to like to be questioned in what he was doing. But to a much greater degree, Obama seems to be someone who is very sensitive to criticism. And I think a lot of that stems from his childhood. And, I mean, and I'm sure some people are saying, well, yeah, but, it's not my fault he had a crappy childhood, and here we're having to deal with it. I just want to explain it, okay? I just want to show that there is a basis for it. Now, then you get into the whole idea of, I'm going to go back to childhood a little bit here just to kind of explain some differences in people. Now, this is not set in stone, okay? I'm just, it's not set in stone. But There are differences in liberals and conservatives. Conservatives, and when I say conservative, I mean right of center. Okay, so libertarians, I'll get to you next. I'll get to you in a moment. Anyway, conservatives tend to have an idea of a fixed value system. This is right, this is wrong. They have a sense of their place in society. I am a father, I'm a mother, I'm a Baptist, I'm a Mormon, I'm a, any number of religious entities. And then liberals and I think that all comes back to, childhood, how they were raised, coupled with the values they were taught. Liberals are a little bit more flexible in what defines them. And of course, like I said before, their concept of God. Most liberals are religious, contrary to what many people would like to believe. Most of them are religious, but their idea of God is a little bit more flexible, a little bit more inclusive, and so forth. And also, the liberal tends to be more into the idealism. This is the way things should be, versus this is the way things are. So maybe when your kids are watching TV when they're 6 or 7 years old, and there's some nature show on where the bear eats a deer, and you ask the kid, well, what do you think of that? I'm sorry you had to see that. And the kid's going, well, the bear was hungry. That's what they're designed to do. You probably got a conservative coming up. If, on the other hand, the kid's going, why didn't the cameraman try to warn the deer before it got eaten? And, well, you probably got a liberal growing up there. I mean, that's just a simplification, but I think it's probably pretty true. Now, beyond that, okay, I did promise to deal with libertarians. I think libertarians, to a certain degree, almost have a deistic view of God, maybe. Kind of the idea that God set things up. Now, that doesn't mean that you're a deist in the strict sense. I just mean that kind of the great architect or the watchmaker or whatever. He set things up, and now it's kind of like, now it's your time to prove yourselves. So, your idea of religion is that God's watching you and He's keeping tabs on what you're doing. Kind of like Santa. Who's naughty, who's nice, and making his list. But He's not going to interfere that much. And I think that's more the libertarian point of view. So the liberal, God's like the cosmic bran muffin sort of way of looking at things. The conservative, it's the judge waiting to get you. The libertarian, it's more like the professor who's just waiting to see if you pass the test. So, but that's all going to be based on your views from childhood. Now, here's where we get into all of the contradictions this week. Conservatives are having a total fit. And why would that be? Simple. Here's someone being accused of breaking all the rules. And not only breaking the rules, but being accused by people who made a huge stink about whenever the conservatives broke the rules. I mean, many of these people from Generation X or baby boomers remember a teacher or remember someone on TV just going off on Nixon was a crook. And Nixon, by the way, I grew up in that kind of household. My mom hated Richard Nixon. Oh my gosh. I mean, if you had, I don't know who she hated more, Hitler or Richard Nixon, but I seriously don't know. I mean, she hated Nixon with a passion. But that's right, we had a McGovern bumper sticker on our car. I remember that even when I was a little kid. Well, anyway, the thing is that many of the same people who would have been just all over Nixon are saying, look, if they're doing a history lesson, let's say you have a really liberal history teacher or something, not too uncommon in the United States, and they focus on Nixon. Oh, Nixon did this, and he was bad, and he was bad, and he was bad. And then all of a sudden, we hit Obama. And then it's like, well, it's not that, other people's done it. Yeah, it's okay. I think people are exaggerating things and stuff like this. And you're going, what? So the conservative in their fixed views are having a fit. I mean, they're like, wait a minute, the rules have been broken. You guys are being inconsistent. You're being hypocritical. The liberals, on the other hand, now, I'm not going to excuse them. I'm going to explain them. They are flexible in the sense that they are idealist as well. So there we get the problem. They want to build their utopia. That's one thing about liberals. They love utopia. I mean, Pol Pot was a history teacher, by the way. He wanted to build a utopian Cambodia. And, oh my gosh, it was going to, that meant that like half the population had to die, but, maybe extreme, but utopian. Utopians are dangerous if you're not part of their grand master scheme. But essentially, liberals are, in a sense, utopia with a lowercase u. They want this nice society where everyone's nice and everyone's equal, and they have this really weird view of Sweden as being that way. I knew this guy. He moved to Sweden because his boyfriend lived in Sweden. And he said that when he lived in New York, he considered himself a socialist. When he moved to Sweden, it took him a year to consider himself a libertarian after he had lived in a socialist country for a while. But the thing is that the liberal is looking at Obama as being a secular savior. The liberal in their minds, they've had to endure maybe Ronald Reagan, if they're old enough, then George Bush. And remember, I know a lot of you are saying, well, yeah, but they're New World Order kind of. Bush was a New World Order type of conservative. The liberal doesn't see it that way, okay? They just see liberal conservative. They don't see beyond the New World Order thing. Most of them don't. If they do, they tend to be more like Occupy Wall Street people, which I would say are more progressives, not liberals. Anyway, the liberals had to endure the smart George Bush, the older one, and then Clinton, who was kind of a moderate. I mean, I would actually say he was a moderate Democrat. Yes, he was liberal by comparison, but moderate in many ways. Remember, he was the one that got in the Defense of Marriage Act. He's the one that put in Don't Ask, Don't Tell in the military, which has now been struck down. Both of them have been pretty much eliminated now. And then, of course, there was 8 years of Bush. And they felt like this slowed down the progress of society. Well, now, all of a sudden, Obama comes along, and he's practically able to walk on water. He's that good. And he's going to change things. In their minds, he's different. Okay? And then when you say, yeah, but he's backed by the same people that got bailed out in 2008, and the big bankers, and they'll look at you like, no, you're that's wrong, and they'll change the subject. And that's not because they are actually just trying to be deceptive, but they're being just like if you corner, let's say, a Jehovah's Witness and start asking some kind of embarrassing questions, they're going to immediately change the subject or walk away. Okay? And I think that's true for all religions. And in fact, I've seen atheists do it too. So it's, everyone does it because they want to protect their ego. And if you start questioning their beliefs, that's hurting their ego. And so when Obama gets in there, and he is this great hope for change, and in their minds, they fill in the blanks for what the change is, you now have, again, kind of a cultish following, a cult of personality for Obama. And so when the contradictions hit, you have two choices. You start to hate him, or you defend him. And for the most part, most people in like the establishment liberals, although there's a lot of liberals again from the progressives that have kind of abandoned Obama, but there's many who will make sure that nothing gets out. Now some people say conspiracy. Okay, Fox News is the only one that's actually reporting much on Benghazi. CBS has done some reporting, but a lot of the other stuff, it's not even been on the radar of the networks. And you would think if there was nothing to hide, then the networks would be on there really doing an in-depth investigation instead of ignoring it. Well, the thing is, you're not going to pay attention to something that's questioning your very core essence. Okay? It doesn't not necessarily, I'm not saying it isn't part of some sort of little conspiracy, but it doesn't have to be a conspiracy. It can just be that you're questioning the values that they hold dear. And if they have this idea that Obama, is this wonderful person, then it's going to be just like these religious cults where, the guy's, sleeping with, I'm not saying Obama does it, I'm just saying it's going to be like the religious cults where some guy's sleeping with 12-year-old boys or something like that, and he points this out to his devoted followers, and they're like, yeah, but, and then they start making excuses. Okay, it is part of a denial process. And then, another concept in Freudianism, or psychoanalysis, is called projection. Now, with projection, that's like the person, the lady who secretly looks at pornography and then she condemns women that are walking down the street in revealing clothing. That's projection. How dare that woman do that? I mean, doesn't she have any shame? Doesn't she have any values? And then she goes home and, locks all the doors and switches on the computer. So the thing is that the liberal does a little bit of political projecting too. And that is when they start getting attacked, they will dig anything up possible to protect their ego and find something wrong about the other person. But in fact, it is part of their own personality that's being projected onto their opponents. There's a certain woman who liberals love. I'm not going to mention her name. I don't want to give her publicity, but she's a commentator on MSNBC. And when she starts presenting people she disagrees with, she will just become venomous towards them and start putting words in their mouth. My opponent here believes, and then give some really extreme answer and then go into something a little bit less extreme, but you've already planted the seed that this person's crazy, and then you actually deal with something that's not hypothetical, but at the same time that it's a rhetorical device. You've gotten the person to think that your opponent's crazy. I think a lot of that is projection, and so the liberal who feels like, there's many liberals I think that are actually closet racist, closet elitist, and so forth, who in a microsecond will condemn a person for being racist, but then at the same time they will say, well, it's a good thing we have abortion clinics in ghettos because there'll be like poor people being born there. And you're going, well, wait a minute, I thought you were a liberal. I mean, you say it's good that we're aborting those kids. And they'll just kind of look at you funny. Yeah, and I had a professor one time. He this was during the Ethiopian crisis, and when they have all the live food aid and stuff. And he seriously, this guy was this guy was practically communist. Maybe he was communist, I don't know. But he made a comment and said that does it really make sense to save the life of a woman in Ethiopia who is going to have 12 kids afterwards, and maybe a generation later those 12 kids will be starving? And, this person would probably be the first if you got in an argument with him, would project all of these nasty things about conservatives. onto you. Oh, by the way, if you're libertarian, the liberals consider you just like really bad conservatives, okay? Because you don't want any rules. And liberals, that's an interesting thing about liberals. Liberals will say that they want freedom when it comes to the things they want freedom for. But they will, at the same time, turn around and they'll say that they don't trust you with freedoms. So I'll give you an example. If you have a situation in which you have let's just say abortion. That's an easy one. A liberal feels like if you have prayer in a classroom, then that is that is something the child is not ready to accept and do and participate in until maybe they're 18. If someone's 14 and pregnant, then the liberal will say, no, they have that right to do that. They have a right to go get an abortion or so forth. I'm sure there's many a liberal mother who would be like, okay, well, I would understand if my daughter felt like she had to do that. But if her daughter came in and said she wanted to get her nipples pierced or something, would be like, no, you can't do that. That's terrible. I will not allow that. You can do it when you're 18, but you cannot do it when you're under my roof. There's an inconsistency. And I think conservatives have a little bit less of it. Libertarians have a lot less of it. Liberals have a lot of it. So you have the right to do what they say you have a right to do, but then when it comes to other issues, then you're not trusted. Take a look at the gun control issue. Okay, gun control is a perfect example, too. I mean, if you take a look at the crime, if you take a look at the accidental gun deaths, amongst kids, and so forth, and then look at the states that have the most guns per capita, like Montana and Idaho and Utah. And then you find they have the lowest rate of problems. Well, that goes totally against what a liberal would believe. The liberal, many of these people are just like, what? No, it can't be true. We have to regulate guns. We have to get rid of them. And I'm just wondering how many of them are just actually projecting their own fear of weapons, because if they had a weapon, they might use it. They might get angry, so they're starting to think, well, if I'm capable of doing something nasty, then maybe someone else is capable of doing something nasty. So I don't want my neighbor to have a gun because maybe they're as nasty as I am. They may not think that consciously, but they do subconsciously. Now, again, let's take a look at some of the things that basically the liberal press has repressed. Repression meaning you push it under. You don't talk about it. But if we take a look at, it's not just Benghazi. And we know the issue there. The people that did the nasty stuff in Benghazi were the people that we were arming in the first place to get rid of Gaddafi, because Gaddafi wouldn't play the game anymore. He wanted to start selling his oil to the Chinese, and he wanted to start selling his oil for gold, and he wanted to set up an African Union similar to the European Union, and kind of start marginalizing the IMF and the World Bank and all this other influence and so forth from Europe. Well, something had to be done. And now some people would say, well, no, he was a nasty person. Well, at the same time, Bahrain was doing a lot worse than Gaddafi was even accused of doing. But we were supporting Bahrain because they have a U.S. naval base. So, that's okay. That's justification. That's rationalization. And then we look at Syria. I can't see why anyone would justify what's going on with Syria right now. I mean, on the scale of things, if you compare Assad with the Saudi royal family or a number of other Arab or Middle Eastern nations, Assad was not, or is not really, the worst guy on the block. And he's certainly not out there chopping people's heads off like the Al-Qaeda people that we're supporting in Syria. And the thing is that no peace protest. No one's saying, no, we should not be in there. We should not be interfering. It's silent. Because, again, Libya, wiretapping, IRS being abused, it's okay because it's Obama and he's going to make a better future for us. And so, again, their projected image of this nice future, they don't want anything to interfere with that. And so, even if he goes as far as to bomb Iran, it's not going to change them. There's not going to be a huge peace protest about that. And what's going on in Pakistan, things like that. If Reagan and Bush had done this stuff, they would have been crucified in the press. They never would have gotten away with it. We would not be seen. Everyone now. It's funny. You talk to someone young now that's kind of grown up in the post 9/11 era, and you say, "Oh, by the way, you know that when you go on the computer or when you send text messages, that it's probably being monitored." And they look at you like, "Okay, that's okay." And this is the climate we want. Basically, First Amendment, Second, Fourth, 10th Amendment, especially the Fourth. It means nothing, and people are willing to accept that. Do you think Thomas Jefferson would have wanted someone to stick their hands down his pants? If he was getting on a boat or something back in, 1776. There's no way. But now people just, and it's the conservatives fighting it for the most part. And some consistent liberals are fighting it. But for the most part, your mainstream liberals are willing to put up with it if it brings in the greater good. And they don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. Because ultimately they don't trust themselves. So they can't trust you. So in their minds, they may be thinking, oh, look what someone could do. And they're thinking in the worst case scenarios. What could someone do here? And then you have to safeguard against that. So you set up these invasive checkpoints. You set up this police state, so to speak, in which pretty much we're going to get to the point where you have to show your papers. It'll be just like those movies you see, those Hitchcock movies where they're like in Eastern Germany or something back in the 1950s, and someone just walks up and says, "May I see your papers, please?" And you have to pull out this, certificate that says that you could be in that city at that certain time and certain place. I'll just let you guys know. Just in case someone's thinking, well, they do that in other countries. They don't do it. This invasiveness is not really taking place in Europe. And, well, maybe with the monitoring people's emails and stuff, but not the whole checkpoints and sticking your hands in your pants and stuff. Maybe in England, I'm not sure. I've never been to England. Russia, it's not that bad. Been through the airport in Russia many times. No problems. China, they even have a little thing on their thing. It says you're supposed to rate the security people and that are checking your passport, whether they are nice or not nice on a scale of 1 to 5. And they want their security. And the security people are really nice when you come through. They don't kind of, you accidentally leave a little bit of suntan lotion in your carry-on. They're not like screaming at you and, almost, essentially treating you like a terrorist. So, again, there is a psychological explanation for a lot of this. And yes, it does seem inconsistent. It seems hypocritical and so forth. But if you look up the issues of rationalization, denial, and projection, it'll help you to understand what's going on here. Now, some people that are liberal are probably thinking, hey, wait a minute, you're treating me like I have some sort of psychosis or something. Well, I would just say look up the definitions, essentially, because Yeah, I know that there's a lot of issues where conservatives are guilty of the same things. But usually, since they're going on a conservative tends to go on a set, carved in stone set of values. You know, conservatives are the ones that talk about the Constitution nowadays. All right? Conservatives are the ones reading the Constitution because this is where it has the rules. Whereas liberals have more of a tendency to kind of, let's change the rule book. Okay, you know, if liberals were out there playing a sports game and someone pushed someone out of the way and kicked the goal in a soccer game, the liberals more likely to say, well, come on, that other team is ahead anyway. What difference does it make? Ooh, what difference does it make? Who said that one there? What difference does it make? Very important, liberal lady. But anyway, I think this may be more of an American a political psychology type of thing. I'm not going to start getting into the political psychology of various European countries because it's all different. But in America, I think it's pretty clear to see then what the reasons are. And remember, when you are arguing with someone over these kinds of issues, you're actually arguing with them on a religious basis. So if you've ever been in a Bible bash or any kind of arguing over religion, this is the closest thing you're going to get if you have someone on Facebook or if you have someone that you're talking to at the mall or a family member or something. Maybe ask them. About the utopian thing. Is it a justification to ignore a lot of these things to get this greater good? And see how they react to that. See if they will actually start saying, "Hey, wait a minute. What do you mean?" Well, and then get it onto that level. And when you do, I think you'll see some changes in the debate. And maybe that's how you'll reach people. If you just start throwing stuff out and throwing stuff out and throwing stuff out without knowledge of where it's coming from, I think it's just going to turn into a big heated battle. Unless you can kind of get in there and get into that subconscious and play around in that area. Anyway, time to head off here. So, have a good week and catch you next week here on Unlock the Door, UCY Radio.